How do our most senior leaders feel about the direction and trajectory of our industry? What's their outlook on the future state of wholesaling, and, based on their considerable experiences, what lessons would they help us all learn? That's what we want to find out in this special series of episodes we're calling Lessons from Leaders. Welcome to the only podcast on the planet dedicated to exploring the art, science, and lifestyle of wholesalers and their leaders. This is the new Wholesaler Masterminds radio show. I'm your host, the founder of Wholesaler Masterminds, Rob Shore. This episode of Lessons from Leaders is sponsored by the Money Management Institute and their Center for Distribution Excellence. MMI is the industry association that connects all participants, including asset managers, platform sponsors, and technology providers in the always changing and rapidly growing advisory solutions world. The new Center for Distribution Excellence, built by and for financial industry sales professionals, is dedicated to discovering, promoting, and improving best practices in the wholesaling community. In Industry First, the center brings together a comprehensive suite of events, networking opportunities, and educational resources, all designed to help sales professionals interact with their counterparts from across the industry and learn from the best of the best. For more information about the Center for Distribution Excellence, call MMI at 646-868-8500. That's 646-868-8500, or visit MMINST.org. Wholesalers, welcome back to the new Wholesaler Masterminds radio show, Lessons from Leaders. Today, we are honored to have Sue Thompson with us. Sue is the head of SPDR America's Distribution, EVP. She is Executive Vice President of State Street Global Advisors and serves as head of SPDR America's Distribution. In this role, she's responsible for developing and leading the SPDR ETF distribution strategy across all client channels in the Americas, including institutional, intermediary, and strategic relationships. Prior to State Street, in 2018, she was at Thompson Peak Advisory, where she was CEO and president of her own consulting firm, advising some of the world's largest and most sophisticated investment managers on their growth and distribution strategies. Prior to that, she was at BlackRock for 8 years, where she was responsible for the iShares franchise with the intermediary and institutional asset manager channels in the Americas. And before BlackRock, she was at Vanguard, where she held a number of positions culminating in a senior role in developing the ETF business. She's recognized for recruiting, developing, and mentoring future leaders, and has played a significant role in nurturing female talent across the ETF industry. She serves on the board of Women in ETFs, where she's a founding member. She's a graduate of the University of California, Davis School of Law, and a member of the California State Bar. Sue Thompson, welcome to the new Wholesaler Masterminds radio show, Lessons from Leaders.
Rob, I'm delighted to be here with you today.
I'm beyond delighted. We got our schedules coordinated, and you are here, and that is awesome. So as we do at Lessons from Leaders, we want to make our way through the 5 questions and then have whatever side street discussions are appropriate for us to have. And the first question is always, are you bullish or bearish on wholesaling?
I'm bullish. It's funny. I was just on I was asked by my daughter, of all people, who works in tech, to talk to a colleague who was interested in actually making a shift and moving over to asset management, and specifically was interested in wholesaling. And I didn't realize how bullish I was until I was talking to this young man. And I realized at the end of it, wow, I'm very bullish about our industry.
What makes you so? I mean, there's as in any pro and con, there's potential naysayers galore about the future of our industry, about where technology plays a role, how we're going to, turn into a force of hybrids. We're going to do everything remotely. What makes you so gosh darn bullish?
Well, I think the reason why I'm bullish is because when I think about what an advisor's life is like today and how much pressure there is on the advisor and how precious their time is becoming, it strikes me that they are going to need to find trusted partners that they can rely on for content and for education. And that has traditionally been wholesalers, and I just don't see that going away. I think if anything, our role as salespeople becomes that much more important, and certainly the educational part of that becomes that much more important.
Yeah. Do you think that there is a finer point to put on the bullishness or bearishness when you stratify the universe of wholesalers and look particularly at your primary product set, which is ETF? Is there something any different in your answer, or again a finer point to put on it?
I do think that wholesaling as we knew it 20 years ago is going to look different 20 years hence, or even 5 years ago and 5 years hence. It's still going to look different. I think that we're going to continue to see much more technology enablement, and that's across the board. That's not just using technology to better target advisors or to better stratify clients or segment. I actually think the way we deliver information, the increasing use of WebExes, the ability to, be able to send a client a presentation that they can pick up and drop off when they want to, sort of on-demand type of programming. I mean, if you look at the streaming services and like Netflix or what have you, and you compare it to cable TV, you can see that we could do something weirdly but, somewhat similar in our industry, where just the way that we consume, if it's changing the way we consume television, surely it's going to be the way we consume information in general.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Both the world that we live in, which is the distribution community, the financial services community as the larger circle around it, and our adaptation of technology, historically slow. And also how our folks that work with and for us have adapted to technology, especially kind of the 40-plus wholesaler. There's a huge range of folks that I've noticed in my practice, my coaching practice. Again, I'll kind of draw that line in the sand, perhaps at 40, where there's, a huge delta between those that are proficient and those that aren't, what they're willing to do to get to a level of proficiency. But what you're talking about demands it, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it absolutely does. And speaking as a person who, saw 40 in the rearview mirror many years ago, I can say categorically, old dogs can learn new tricks, and probably should if they want to stay relevant.
No, that's good counsel, and I think we might be in the same decades as far as that goes. So I agree with you. I mean, heck, we're here doing a podcast, so that's a beautiful thing.
Exactly.
What's one industry trend that concerns you the most today?
I think that the biggest industry trend that concerns me is just the sheer level of fee compression. The global head of our business, Rory Tobin, once made a comment at a conference that that something that is valuable should never cost nothing. And I actually agree very strongly with that. And, I think that it's imperative for us at this stage of the game to educate advisors on, yes, you want to look for something, that is low cost, but that should not be to the exclusion of every other element of looking at an investment. And I'm afraid that we've almost taken that, a little too far. We certainly have seen it in spades in the ETF industry, but I think it's affected all industries, all parts of our industry. And I do worry about that because, fee compression then leads to trying to find, shortcuts in other ways. And ultimately, I think that leads to a deterioration in the level of service that we can provide. And I don't think that's a great thing.
And I was reflecting back on your background. You had a long, illustrious career at Vanguard, a low-priced leader, and so affordable pricing, low pricing, one could argue is part of your DNA of how you grew up in this business. Is that accurate?
Yes. And I'm a very strong believer in low cost, but low cost is different than zero cost. Mm-hmm. And, and I do think that we have to bear in mind that there are elements, that are valuable. And if something is of value, it should not be free.
But how do you think about that as a leader? I mean, as you think about a leader in to the extent that you're influencing any of the pricing strategy around your product, how do you think about that in terms of the offset of, in order to maintain competitiveness with the competition, if we're not, I'm picking arbitrary numbers, if we're not between 3 and 5 basis points of total cost on our bond offering, we're just not competitive. But at the same time, 3 to 5 basis points is not going to keep the lights on or the number of people that we're supposed to employ. How do you walk through that rationalization process?
Well, I think you have to look at the different asset classes. So not all things, are priced the same. But I also think that the other thing that you have to look at is what, if you only focus on expense ratio, you're missing part of the total cost of ownership, at least when it comes to ETFs. And so you also have to look at things like the liquidity of the ETF or, the trading commissions that you would pay. And so when you start to look at what we would call the total cost of ownership, expense ratio is only one element of that. And I think one of the things that we're trying very hard to do, particularly as the markets get more volatile, is to make sure that advisors especially, understand that if all you're looking at is expense ratio, you're missing part of the total picture.
And that goes back to your bullishness on wholesaling, because it requires that thoughtful conversation with your wholesaler to the advisor, that educational process to help inform them about there's more under the hood here than what there appears to be.
That's exactly right. Like, we've done extensive analysis of comparing, 2 ETFs that are actual ETFs, but we don't name names. We just, it's more of an illustrative example, and saying, okay, if you have this ETF and it's twice the price of this other ETF, but the more expensive ETF from an expense ratio perspective has greater liquidity, depending upon the frequency of your rebalancing, it may still be the better choice. It may still give you the lower total cost of ownership. And if you, as an advisor, particularly are acting as a fiduciary, you're going to want to look at that total cost of ownership, because that's the fiduciary standard to which you would be held, not just picking the lowest expense ratio.
That's a great point. Let's look out 5 years. And you already alluded a bit in some of the comments about what concerns you, but how do you think just globally the industry changes as you look out on that 5-year horizon?
I think we are going to, so we've already seen one of the most profound demographic shifts that we ever would expect to see, across several generations, right? And that is this gigantic baby boomer generation that is now, aging, that is now retiring, and instead of being in the accumulation phase, they are in decumulation phase. And, back in the day when my dad was employed back in the 50s, you got a pension when you retired. So you had a pension, you had Social Security, and you had savings. You had this 3-legged stool. And it was nice and stable, and you could depend on it. Well, most people don't have that now. Most people don't have a pension. Social Security, big giant question mark. And so all you then have is savings. And, I think that advisors are going to increasingly be important, because if all you have is this pot of money and it's supposed to last you for the rest of your life, there's not a lot out there, even for the self-directed investor, to know exactly how should I be thinking about decumulation. From what pot do I take it? How do I think about the tax consequences of that? So I view the advisor's role as being less about creating portfolios and more about solving problems like this. how do I make my money last for the rest of my life? And maybe even still leave a legacy.
Well, and it is interesting how it does circle back then to your comment about bullishness on wholesaling, because the fact of the matter is not every advisor is as proficient as they should be in understanding everything that you just spoke about. And it's compounded by, and I just anecdotally, I think I want to get your take on this as well. So let's say, well, just to finish that thought, it is compounded by terminally low yields that no one has any faith are going up anytime soon. Yep. So the part just kind of anecdotally I want to get your thoughts on, and maybe this is just a window into how your firm is thinking presently. What are some of the attitudes about how you're going to accommodate the boomer retiree who traditionally, if you based it upon, say, your dad, who you mentioned, would have part of their retirement income coming from CD investments at the very rock and core of a portfolio? That's not happening today. How is your firm beginning to address what appears to be a prolonged period of low interest rates, low yields that doesn't appear to be relieving anytime soon?
Yeah, I think the way that we're starting to address it is by looking at a package of investment solutions, and that package is typically done in the form of different types of models. And I know that models has become almost an overused term, but it is a helpful construct in that by taking and putting together a model that is professionally managed, you can target certain yields, you can target certain total returns that you're looking to do. And then I think on top of that, the longevity risk obviously is something else entirely different. And, other than insurance products, I don't think anyone's appropriately solved for that yet. So I still personally think that there's a lot of work to be done in the lab to see if it's possible to create a reasonably priced retirement income solution that doesn't necessarily rely on an insurance, sleeve to address the longevity risks. And maybe there's not, but I know that there's a lot of work going on in various laboratories, investment laboratories around this great country.
Yeah, I was going to say that's part of what the propeller heads are getting paid to do, right? Is to try to figure out some of those solutions. Exactly.
But it's certainly something that I think if we go back to what we were talking about before, why I'm bullish on wholesaling. If you think about an advisor just needing to talk to a client who's worried, this client is in their 60s and they're like, do I have enough to live on? If my lifespan is at 65 is now going to be over 100, did I save enough? Is it going to be enough? How should I be thinking about the future? There's one advisor that I'm quite fond of in our industry, and he and I were chatting not too long ago, and we were talking about magazines that we read almost on a religious basis. And I'm a big fan of The Economist. He said, I read Psychology Today because any advisor that doesn't think that part of their job is psychology is woefully underprepared for what's going to come.
That is wise words, for sure, and good reading to accompany it. Is there anything else about that 5-year horizon that piques your interest or has you otherwise, looking forward in terms of change?
I still can't wait to see what happens from a technology perspective. Yeah. We recently brought a group of clients to MIT for some in-depth enrichment, and we were touring this innovation lab that they have, and they were showing us. I don't know whether you've ever heard this, and this is there's a point here, but they were showing us that that dogs have the ability to sniff out cancer, and what they're working on in this lab is trying to create an app for your phone that can in effect, act like the olfactory sense of a dog. And if you think that's where technology is going for sniffing out cancer, what technology that we don't even realize is, closer than we might think in our own industry? And I think when I think about the next 5 years, that's the thing I get most excited about, because data science is showing us all kinds of new things. I think I mentioned that both my daughter, actually my son-in-law as well, both work at Microsoft, and there's a lot of stuff going on in tech that I just think can open up really interesting new worlds for both wholesalers and for the financial advisors they serve.
There's actually a 60 Minutes piece on that MIT lab, and it was fascinating. The unencumbered exploration of what the possibilities could be.
Exactly.
Just endless. But here's my question for you as a pivotal leader in this business. How is any of that going to transform to this arguably old, stodgy world we live in that I alluded to earlier, changes at a glacial speed? How does the immediacy of technology marry with the basic tenets of who we have been for as long as I've been in this business, which is 40 plus years?
Well, it's interesting, because if you were to take a look, even let's call it 10 years ago, which isn't that long.
Mm-hmm.
10 years ago, it was the exception, not the rule, that advisors would give us their portfolio and we would basically do an X-ray of their portfolio.
Yep.
You only did that for really special clients.
Yep.
Now you can go online and or bring the program with you on your iPad and do it right there in the advisor's office. Yeah. That's a pretty big shift. So we're looking at portfolios differently. Because of big data, we can now disaggregate sources of alpha to the most infinitesimal degree, and give advisors a real sense of, are you getting the alpha that you think that you're paying for? That's a pretty profound change. And so I already see wholesaling as having changed substantially. Our most successful wholesalers are the ones that, using both a combination of the, portfolio analysis tools that we have, as well as extensive use of CRM. They know their clients better. They know their clients' portfolios more deeply than any wholesaler could have 10 years ago.
Yeah, that is a wonderful point. That is true. It's easy to look at the light speed of the technology vertical and forget how we have made strides. I do want to shift over to you, and I want to talk about these three things. The three things that your today's Sue, would tell your new to industry self about how to succeed, how to thrive, and how to get ahead. And I'd like you, if you would, please, because you do have this pivotal role as an advocate for women in our business, if you wouldn't mind addressing some of those three, both in terms of the population of aspiring wholesaling distribution professionals, and then a segment of that population, which of course are our female colleagues.
Sure. I think that what I would tell my younger self, the two P's, patience and perseverance.
Okay.
And they go hand in glove. I think throughout a good chunk of my career, and maybe even to this day, if I'm being really honest, patience has never been my strong suit. It's something I actively have to work at, and that means without being patient, it's hard to persevere. And I just think that that's really it sounds boring, but I think it's really important. And I think it's that unwillingness to give up and to keep pushing through that makes a difference. And then, especially for women, I would say a couple of things. and it's hard to confine myself to just a couple.
Go for it.
I think maybe three things.
Okay.
The first one is make sure that you take an active interest in the markets. Invest in yourself. Get your CFA. Go beyond the SEMA. Don't just do the minimum that you have to do, but really become a student of the markets. It'll make you so much more valuable in the long run. Mm. The second thing is speak up. Ask for what you want. Take a chance. When I came into wholesaling, I came from the legal department, and I went from being a lawyer to a salesperson. This is not a traditional.
I'm giggling because
career path.
That's a natural path, right?
Right. It's everybody does that. And what I would say is that someone took a chance on me and said, "I think you could do this." And it would have been easy for me to go, "Oh, I don't think I can," or "Oh, that makes me nervous." I jumped. I took the leap. And it made all the difference in the world. So, don't be afraid to try new things, and don't be afraid to raise your hand and to ask. Or when asked, don't be afraid to say yes. And then the last thing is network, because it's only by networking that you're going to know your true worth. And that was one of the reasons why we founded Women in ETFs, was to give women an opportunity to network, so that they could continue to hone their skills, they could continue to understand their worth, and continue to make strides in their career.
Can you elaborate on something you said there? If I heard you correctly, networking is the only way to determine your true worth. Could and I paraphrase that perhaps just a bit. Mm-hmm. Can you expound on that? If you wait for someone to tell you what you're worth, you're going to get undersold, always, right? But if you, and especially these days, if you're at any company, you're not supposed to talk with one another about what you're making, right? Yep. And you're not going to know what people in other parts of your ecosystem might be being paid. So, maybe you're, I don't know, with an index provider, and you're thinking, here's my net worth, I'm worth this much per year because I'm with the index provider and I've been there for 10 years or what have you. But if you went over to sales, maybe your trajectory looks different. And so it isn't until you network and you find out what other people are doing and how your skill set might apply, and maybe you're not on the right path. Maybe there's a different, better path for you. So I think that's where... and I'll give you a great example. Unfortunately, it happened straight to me. But there was a woman on my team that had been very active in women in ETFs, and she got to she got to be very well known throughout the women in ETF ecosystem. And a competitor came and offered her considerably more money, and it was, I think, in part because even though she didn't have as much experience out in the field, thus me not being able to make a good counter, nevertheless, that experience in women in ETFs paid off for her, because through her networking and through her understanding of the importance of networking, she was basically able to significantly increase her compensation. So on the one hand, I was sad for losing her, but on the other hand, I was kind of like, what? That's like, I have to admire someone that takes control of their career in that way. Absolutely. And your counsel there is super important, regardless of gender, of course, because yes, it is germane to women in investing, women in ETFs, but it's also a great comment about getting the barometric pressure, getting the temperature right on your career in an environment where you otherwise wouldn't have a chance to do it through networking. So that's why I was so curious about that. So thank you for that. Mm-hmm. Who is the greatest influencer in your career? This is going to sound a little unusual, but probably my husband, more so than almost anyone else, because
when things would come at me like, do you want to move from being a lawyer to a salesperson? He was always my sounding board. And, and he offered great counsel. And I think sometimes believed in me when I didn't believe in myself.
Sounds awesome to me. And it's not the least bit unusual because we've had leaders in the past, and just as an aside, other folks I've spoken to, I mean, it's spouses, it's parents, it's siblings. It's not always just the wise sage in the C-suite. It's a whole host of folks.
I've had my fair share of that as well. I mean, I've benefited from, working for a number of people to this day who I just, admire and respect. But ultimately, I think it's one thing to be sort of nurtured and mentored. It's another thing, when somebody is really being an advocate, like really advocating for you and is your sort of biggest fan. And I think, I wish everyone in their career has somebody that is their biggest fan because it really does make a huge difference.
That's awesome. Sue Thompson, she is EVP, head of Spider America's distribution, and we have caught her. Her workday is still not done. She has an engagement with colleagues in India later today, so please have another shot of espresso, and we thank you for spending time with us today, Sue.
Thank you so much, Rob.
Wholesalers, come back next time for another episode of Lessons from Leaders from the new Wholesaler Masterminds radio show. For more information about Wholesaler Masterminds, visit us at wholesalermasterminds.com. Find the new Wholesaler Masterminds radio show at Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Google Play, and Spotify.